Hello guys and girls out there, wherever you are. Welcome to another totally random video. And yes, today's video is not minidisc related. And I know some of you probably think, what the heck is going on? Are you giving up on minidisc? No, I'm not fully giving up on minidisc, but I do have to say there are some problems because I have a lot of music and therefore I have a lot of mini discs. And right now I have over 200 mini discs. And there are times where it just stops being fun because it's more difficult to keep everything nicely organized. And sometimes it also feels kind of convoluted. And there are also times where it just doesn't make sense to record music on a format that only gives me 80 minutes of recording time. For example, dark ambient music, most of the songs are 10-15 minutes long, so you need a lot of recording time. And I also purchased the download version of an album called Finish by Tech Noir, and this album has a total length of almost 10 hours, or maybe even more than 10 hours. So it wouldn't make sense recording something like this on a mini disc, especially when you know that the songs, I think it's 32 songs, and each song is at least 35 minutes long. So you can't even get three complete songs on one disc. So it wouldn't make sense. And that's why I started using DAT. But instead of using DAT cassettes, I think I will end up using DDS cassettes because they are identical to DAT, and that's why they are compatible with DAT recorders. But the great thing about DDS, digital data storage, is that those tapes, they are actually cheaper than the DAT tapes for whatever reason. I guess it has something to do with the license, or I don't know. And another great thing is that with DDS you get longer tapes. So I believe the longest DAT cassette offers me a recording time of 180 minutes. And I know that you shouldn't use the longest tapes possible because it's not good for the tape and the device. So the longest DDS tape that you should use is DDS2, which is 120 meters. And that gives me a recording time of 240 minutes. So 4 hours of recording time in lossless CD quality. So yeah, that's definitely a huge improvement over mini disc, but there are some other downsides to it, and I get to that later. Right now, let me just show you and demonstrate the device itself. So as you know, the device is a Sony DTC-ZE700, and it's a nice DAT device, a nice DAT deck. And for some reason, there are many people who demonstrate their DAT devices on YouTube, but hardly anybody ever says anything about it. So yeah, that's what I want to do different. So first let's put in a tape. And for some reason in the manual it tells me whenever I'm using a new tape, like if I want to record something on a tape for the first time, I should fully fast forward the tape all the way to the end and then rewind the tape. I don't know what that does, but that's the way it is. Yeah, as you can tell, I have already recorded something on this tape. Of course, we have a timer, so if you have something connected, you can record or play at a certain time when the power turns on. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a sleep timer, so I cannot listen to music from the DAT tapes when I go to sleep, and then it automatically turns off after 60 minutes, 90 minutes, or something like this. So it doesn't have that feature. Yeah, so with that, it basically works kind of like a mini disc if you record a mini disc. Only difference is on mini disc and even on DCC, we have track titles. And this is something that we don't have on the DAT, so we cannot title the tracks. Um, I don't know if I'm missing it or not. I mean, typing or putting in the titles, it's a pain in the ass if you don't have a proper keyboard. So I'm not too disappointed that I don't have that. But what we have are track marks so that we can skip between tracks. So I just push AMS, so skip to the last track. And there's the next track. Only difference here is it's not called a track mark. It's actually called a start ID. And the start IDs, you can set them in various different times. You can set them automatically. So if you record something from a CD and it's plugged into the optical line in of this DAC, it detects the track marks of the CD and then it sets the start ID identical to the track marks. You can also record something from another digital source or from an analog source, and it automatically sets a track mark or a start ID whenever it detects, I think, at least 2 seconds of silence, something like this. So it works the same way as with every mini disc recorder. You can also manually set the start ID. So right here we have the right button. So if we push that, it automatically writes the start ID. And we can also, if I pause and go back, so here it says start ID, and I can also erase this start ID if I want to kind of relocate this start ID, or if I don't want a start ID to be there. And if you want to kind of relocate a start ID, we also have the rehearsal button right here. So it's also the same thing like with a mini disc when it's looping through the last, I don't know, 5 or 3 seconds, and then you can slowly move back and forward and find the right position where the start ID is supposed to be. Yeah, and then there is another thing that we have on DAT, because start ID is really only telling the device where a new track begins, but it doesn't know which track it actually is. So in addition to the start ID, we also have track numbers, or in this case they are called program numbers. So we see it right here, and we can see, okay, there is no program number, but we are already over 1 hour into the tape. So why isn't there a program number? So for example, if you erase a start ID and you manually set a start ID, then chances are that it kind of gets confused and it doesn't know which program number it is, and therefore it cannot set the correct program number. So if I go back, so here we have another track, and you can see again no program number. So if we have this problem, we have the renumber button right here, which is fast forwarding the entire tape, and it counts the start IDs and then it renumbers all the tracks. So let me just do that right now, because there are quite a few tracks right here without a program number. So it probably is going to take a while, but as you can see, fast forwarding or rewinding is very, very fast on DAT devices, because when you play or record a DAT cassette, it is moving very, very slowly, and therefore when you fast forward or rewind, it is very fast and very quick. So what it does is it is rewinding the cassette all the way to the beginning, and then it's fast forwarding all the way towards the end. So I don't know. So now it is writing the program number, and the program number is always written at the exact same point where the start ID is also located. So right now there is another one. So it's nice to watch, but it can also take some time, as you can tell. So this is why you do something like this really at the end, when you have recorded everything on this cassette, because otherwise, why would you do it so many times? So while it does that, let me just show you some other things right here. Over this side. So of course we can skip between tracks, we can fast forward. Here we have the rack mute. So this records, I believe, 9 seconds of silence, because when we fast forward, it also works as some kind of a end search, where it is searching the end of the last track. But the problem is, the end search is really just searching for a blank point. So like 9 seconds of blank. So if you have, I don't know, 10 songs and you re-record something like this, and you only have 3 songs, and then you kind of erase the last remaining songs by recording silence over those songs, because you cannot really fully erase the music. You can only re-record silence over those songs. That doesn't work, because it's really searching for blank and not for silence. So I don't know when or why to use the rack mute. But yeah, of course we have the normal record, play, pause, stuff like that. Here we have the input analog, optical, and coax. And then we have the rec mode right here. I hope it is focusing. Yeah, kind of. So rec mode, let's just go back a little bit. We can choose between the different standard rec modes, which is 48 kilohertz and 44.1 kilohertz, which is the exact same quality as a CD. So if you want to record a CD or from a CD, it definitely doesn't make sense to set the rec mode to 48 kilohertz, since a CD is always 44.1 and you won't gain any extra sound quality or anything like this. And then we also have the long play setting, and long play is actually 32 kilohertz. And if we have long mode set, the long play recording, this means that the recording time is doubled. So if we have 240 minutes, it's now 480 minutes. But a very curious thing, so now it's finally done. So the curious thing is, if you record from a digital source like a CD, which is 44.1 kilohertz, you cannot set the rec mode to be long play, to be 32 kilohertz. So you cannot go lower than the actual source. So again, if the digital source is 48 kilohertz, you cannot set the rec mode to 44.1 or even 32. It just doesn't work. So if you want to record something from a CD in long play mode, you have to connect your CD player to the analog line in via RCA cables. This is the only way that this works. It's kind of a weird thing, but yeah, that's just the way it is. And then we also have the SBM, which stands for super bit mapping, and you only use this if you record from an analog source. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. And we also have the record volume right here, and we have, it's basically two wheels, so we can also set the balance as well and change the rec volume of the left and the right channel separately. So yeah, this is it. So as you can tell, it works perfectly fine. I only had one problem once when I was recording. For some reason, the recording just stopped without me doing anything. The recording stopped and it fully rewind. How do you say it? Yeah, it was rewinding the entire tape all by itself. And I haven't reached the end of the tape. It was still recording. Everything was fine. So I don't know exactly what happened right there. So another thing that we have is the merge-in right here. So if I push record without a cassette inside, it says no tape, and then it's switching to the source, which is now a CD. And then here we have margin, which is basically just the decibel numbers. So it shows you how loud the source is. So you can use that to adjust the rec volume if you record something from a analog source. Right now we are at a digital source. And margin is basically just resetting the decibels. So for example, if there was a peak and it was over 0 dB, it would blink. 0.0 would start flashing, and you can always push merge-in reset to reset this so that you can adjust it in a different way. Then we also have the mode. which is only available if I have a cassette inside. So mode is basically just a display mode. So let's start playing the tape. So this is now the ABS time, which is the absolute time of the entire tape. Then we have the program time, which is the elapsed time of the song that is playing right now. And then we have the remaining. So it tells me 2 hours because this is what a normal DAT tape would be. But since this isn't a DAT tape, it's a DDS tape, I have more than 2 hours. I don't know exactly what this is. Maybe this is the I don't know what this was. We can also reset the time. And yeah, that's basically it. There is also a remote control, but the one that I got is definitely not the original remote control for this DAC. I mean, you can also already see this by the look of this remote control. And there is also some features that this DAC doesn't have. For example, date, recorded and present, and a fader. So those are all things that this DAC doesn't have. But, you know, most of the stuff works. But wait, there is way more stuff that I need to explain. So first of all, when we talk about the different rack modes, if we have the rack mode set to 48 or 44.1 kilohertz, they are both a recording quality of 16-bit. But if we choose the long record mode, which is 32 kilohertz, this is actually only 12-bit. But there is a little trick that you can do to also record 32 kilohertz in 16-bit instead of 12-bit. For example, if you want to record your favorite songs from your analog cassettes or whatever. So the first thing that you have to do is you have to digitize your cassette so that you have, let's say, 24-bit and 32 kilohertz. Then you have to go to you have to use an optical cable. I don't know if it also works with a digital coax cable, but it definitely works with optical. So you have to go to the adjustments of your line out of your computer and set the quality of the line out to 24-bit, maybe also 16-bit, and 32 kilohertz. And then on the DAT machine, you have to set the rack mode to either 48 or 44.1, even though we want to record in 32. We still have to set it in 48 or 44.1. And if we start to record and we start to play the music, because it's digital, the DAC detects that the signal that is coming in is actually 32 kilohertz, and it then switches over to 32 kilohertz. But because we are still in the standard rack mode, it remains 16-bit. And we can also see this, that in the display it doesn't say long, even though it says 32 kilohertz down here. So it's a little bit tricky, but that's something that you should know, that you can record in 32 kilohertz with 16-bit instead of 12-bit. So now that we're talking about all those bits, let's talk about something another very interesting. You see, if you want to record something from an analog source, the first thing that this DAC does is it first converts this analog signal into a 24-bit digital signal, and only when we record something, it's only then when this 24-bit signal is being converted into a 16-bit signal. So you would probably think, what the heck? That makes absolutely no sense. I mean, if you already have a 24-bit signal, why reduce it to a 16-bit signal? Why not record in 24-bit if you already have that signal? Well, there are two reasons. Reason number one, 24-bit means it's more information than 16-bit. So more information needs more space. So therefore, if you record in 24-bit, the recording time of the cassette would be reduced. So instead of 90 minutes, I don't know, maybe you can only record 60 minutes or maybe even just 30 minutes, because if the recording time is twice as much if we record in 12-bit instead of 16-bit, well, that's just a 4-bit difference. But if we record in 24 instead of 16, that's 8-bit. So yeah, it's probably going to be a third of the recording time, maybe. So yeah, that's something that you should know. It is capable of creating a 24-bit signal. And the second reason is they are doing this to improve the overall sound quality. It has something to do with, I think it has something to do with quantization. So it's basically reducing the amount of information to also reduce the amount of noise. So it's like saying, okay, it's better to have a 16-bit signal with only music instead of 24-bit with music and a lot of noise. So yeah, it is supposed to improve the sound quality. But if we have SBM, super bit mapping, activated, which only works when we record from an analog source, it adds another virtual 4-bit somehow. So if we record something from an analog source and we have super bit mapping activated, we have a recording that is still 16-bit, but it sounds as good as 20-bit, basically. So yeah, it is a little bit confusing, I know. It is just a little bit confusing, and I just figured out all those things in the last 2 days. So yeah, that's it. That's my video about the DAT machine. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next totally random video. Bye.